My name is Rosa. I'm 74 years old and I no longer have tears left to cry. I spent them all raising my two sons, Martin and Stephen, alone after their father left me for a woman 20 years younger. I never loved again. I never slept peacefully again. But I worked. God knows how much I worked. I cleaned other people's houses, scrubbed office floors at dawn, and sold empanadas at the hospital entrance. Everything for them. To give them a future, a dignified life. I gave them my youth, my back, my health. And today they threw me out. But let me start from the beginning, because this story needs to be told properly. This story needs to be heard by every mother, every father, every child who thinks they know what sacrifice means. I was 22 when I married Roberto. He was handsome, charming, and promised me the world. We lived in a small apartment downtown, barely making ends meet, but we were happy. Or at least, I thought we were. When Martin was born, Roberto seemed excited. He would hold him for hours, talking about all the things they would do together, all the places they would visit. 2 years later came Stephen. By then, cracks were already showing in our marriage. Roberto started coming home late, smelling like cheap perfume and expensive alcohol. When I confronted him, he would explode into rage, screaming that I was paranoid, that I was suffocating him with my suspicions. "You're just a housewife, Rosa," he would shout. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I'm working my ass off to support this family." But I knew. Wives always know. The lipstick stains on his collar weren't mine. The phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. The way he looked at me like I was a burden, an obstacle to his happiness. The day he left, Martin was 4, and Stephen was 2. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Tuesday morning in March. The boys were playing with their toy cars in the living room when Roberto walked in with 2 suitcases. "I'm leaving, Rosa," he said, not even looking at me while he spoke. "I can't do this anymore." "What do you mean you can't do this anymore?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What about your sons? What about our family?" He finally looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes broke something inside me that never healed. Contempt. Pure, cold contempt. "Family?" He laughed bitterly. "This isn't a family, Rosa. This is a prison. I'm 28 years old, I'm in the prime of my life, and I'm wasting it changing diapers and listening to you complain about money all day." Martin looked up from his toys, sensing the tension in the room. "Daddy? Where are you going with the suitcases?" Roberto didn't even answer him. He just walked out the door, leaving it open behind him. I stood there for what felt like hours, holding Stephen in my arms while Martin kept asking where Daddy went. That night, after I put the boys to bed, I sat on the kitchen floor and cried until I had nothing left. But even then, I knew I couldn't fall apart. Those 2 little boys needed me. They needed me to be strong, to be everything their father wasn't. So I became everything. I became the mother who woke up at 4 a.m. to clean offices before the boys woke up. I became the mother who sold empanadas on the street corner while they were at school. I became the mother who worked 3 jobs and still found time to help with homework, to attend school plays, to bandage scraped knees, and chase away nightmares. I became the mother who never, ever gave up. The years blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and determination. I would come home from cleaning houses all day, my hands raw and bleeding from scrubbing floors, my back screaming in pain, and still find the energy to cook dinner, check homework, and tuck my boys into bed with a smile. "Mommy, why do you always smell like soap?" little Stephen asked me once. "Because Mommy works very hard to make sure you have everything you need, my love," I told him, kissing his forehead. "When I grow up, I'm going to buy you a big house so you don't have to work so hard," Martin promised me one night when he was 7. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. As the boys grew older, I began to notice changes. Martin became more demanding, more entitled. When I couldn't afford the expensive sneakers his classmates wore, he would throw tantrums that lasted for hours. "All my friends have better stuff than me," he would scream. "Why can't you just get a better job? Why can't you be like other moms?" "I'm doing the best I can, Martin," I would tell him, trying to keep my voice calm. "These things cost money, and money doesn't grow on trees." "Then why did you have kids if you couldn't afford them?" he shot back one day when he was 12. Those words hit me like a physical blow. I had to excuse myself to the bathroom, where I sat on the edge of the bathtub and wondered if he was right. Maybe I was a terrible mother, maybe I was failing them. But then I would remember the nights I stayed up sewing holes in their clothes so they wouldn't go to school looking poor. I would remember the times I went hungry so they could have seconds at dinner. I would remember every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment I chose their needs over mine. No, I wasn't failing them. I was doing everything humanly possible. Stephen was different from Martin, but not in a good way. Where Martin was demanding, Stephen was cold. He rarely spoke to me unless he needed something. He would sit at the dinner table in complete silence, eating the food I had prepared, then disappear into his room without so much as a thank you. When he turned 16, I found drugs in his backpack. Marijuana, pills I didn't recognize, and a roll of cash that was more money than I made in a month. "Where did this come from?" I demanded, confronting him in his room. "It's none of your business," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "None of my business? You're my son. You live in my house. Everything you do is my business." He finally looked at me then, and for a moment, I saw his father in his eyes. That same contempt, that same dismissive coldness. "Your house?" he laughed. "Mom, you rent this dump. You don't own anything. You're nobody." I slapped him. I had never hit my children before, but those words cut so deep that my hand moved before my brain could stop it. He looked at me with shock, then anger, then something worse than both. Hatred. "Don't you ever touch me again," he said quietly. "When I turn 18, I'm out of here, and you'll never see me again." I wanted to apologize, to explain that I only hit him because his words hurt so much, but he was already walking out of the room. That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it then. The boys finished high school, barely. Martin went to community college for a year before dropping out, claiming it was a waste of time. Stephen got a job at a warehouse and moved out the day after his 18th birthday, just like he'd promised. I thought maybe things would get better once they were adults. Maybe they would understand the sacrifices I had made. Maybe they would appreciate everything I had done for them. I was so naive. Martin moved back in when he was 25, after losing his apartment due to unpaid rent. He brought his girlfriend, Sandra, a woman who looked at me like I was dirt on her shoe from the moment she walked through my door. "This place is tiny," she complained on her first day. "And it smells like old people." "I'm sorry," I said, though I didn't know why I was apologizing. "I'll try to keep it cleaner." Martin didn't defend me. He never defended me. Instead, he started making demands. He wanted me to cook for Sandra too. He wanted me to do their laundry. He wanted me to clean up after them while they sat on the couch watching TV and complaining about everything. "Mom, can you make us some food?" he would say, not ask. "And make it good this time. Sandra doesn't like your cooking." I would bite my tongue and go to the kitchen, preparing meals with ingredients I could barely afford, serving them like I was their maid instead of Martin's mother and the owner of the house they were living in rent-free. Stephen, meanwhile, had gotten married to a woman named Jennifer who seemed nice enough at first. They had a small wedding that I wasn't invited to help plan, though I was expected to contribute money I didn't have. "It's only $2,000, Mom," Stephen said when he asked for the money. "It's not that much." $2,000 was more than I made in 3 months, but I didn't tell him that. Instead, I took out a loan, adding to the debt that was already crushing me. The wedding was beautiful, I suppose. I sat in the back row, wearing a dress I had bought at a thrift store, watching my son marry a woman who had barely spoken to me during their entire engagement. During the reception, Stephen gave a speech thanking everyone who had supported him and Jennifer. He thanked his friends, his in-laws, his boss, even his father, who had shown up with his young wife, and acted like he had been there all along. He never mentioned me. Not once. I sat there, watching my son thank everyone except the woman who had raised him, and felt something die inside me. After the wedding, Stephen and Jennifer bought a house across town. A nice house, much nicer than the small place I had raised him in. When I asked how they could afford it, Stephen was vague. Jennifer's family helped, he said, and I've been saving. I wanted to ask where he had learned to save money, since I had certainly never been able to teach him that skill, but I kept my mouth shut. The visits became less frequent. Phone calls became shorter. Christmas and birthday gifts became afterthoughts, if they happened at all. Meanwhile, Martin and Sandra were still living in my house, treating it like their personal hotel. They would leave messes for me to clean, eat food without replacing it, and bring friends over at all hours of the night without asking. "Mom, we need some privacy," Martin told me one evening. "Can you go to your room?" I was sitting in my own living room, watching a television show I had been looking forward to all day. "This is my house too, Martin," I said quietly. "Actually," Sandra interjected, "we've been talking about that. This place is really too small for 3 adults. Maybe it's time you considered other arrangements." I stared at her, not understanding what she meant. "Other arrangements?" I repeated. "You know," she continued, not meeting my eyes. "Senior living facilities. There are some really nice ones around here. You might be happier there, with people your own age." I looked at Martin, waiting for him to tell his girlfriend that she was out of line, that this was his mother's house, and she had no right to suggest I leave. He said nothing. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had gotten to this point. How had the babies I had raised, the children I had sacrificed everything for, become these strangers who saw me as a burden? If you're watching this and thinking about your own mother, or if you're a mother going through something similar, please take a moment to comment below and share your story. Subscribe to hear how this story ends, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes we all need a reminder of what real sacrifice looks like. The final blow came on a Tuesday morning in October. I remember the date because it was exactly 46 years to the day after Roberto had walked out on us. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when Martin and Sandra came in, both looking serious. "Mom, we need to talk," Martin said. I turned off the stove and sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had helped him with his homework, where I had bandaged his scraped knees, where I had listened to his problems and offered advice he never took. "What's wrong?" I asked. Sandra was holding a manila folder, which she placed on the table in front of me. "We've been talking," Martin began, "and we think it's time for some changes." I opened the folder and saw legal documents, lots of them. "What is this?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "It's paperwork to transfer the house into our names," Sandra said matter-of-factly. "For tax purposes mostly. You'll still live here, of course, but having the house in our names will save everyone money in the long run." I stared at the papers, my hands shaking. "You want me to sign my house over to you?" "It's just a formality, Mom," Martin said, but he wouldn't look at me. "Nothing will change. You'll still live here, it's just better this way." I should have said no. I should have torn up those papers and thrown them in their faces. I should have reminded Martin of all the nights I worked double shifts to pay for this house, All the times I chose the mortgage payment over my own needs. But I didn't. Because despite everything, despite the way they treated me, despite the fact that they saw me as a burden, I still loved them. I still wanted to believe that deep down, they were the same little boys who had promised to take care of me when I got old. So I signed the papers. Sandra smiled as she gathered them up. This is really for the best, Rosa, you'll see. I should have known then what was coming. I should have seen the trap I was walking into. But love makes you blind, and hope makes you stupid. 3 months later, on a cold January morning, Martin knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. I could hear voices in the living room. Sandra was there and someone else. A man I didn't recognize. When I came out of my room, I saw a man in a suit standing by the front door. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be there. "Mrs. Fernandez," he said, "I'm James Patterson from Patterson Legal Services. I'm here to inform you that you need to vacate these premises within the next hour." I looked at Martin, confused. What is he talking about? "Mom," Martin said, and for the first time in months, he actually looked me in the eye. "You can't live here anymore. The house is in our names now, and we've decided, we need the space." "What space?" I asked, though my voice sounded far away, like it was coming from someone else. "It's the same house, nothing has changed." "Sandra's pregnant," Martin said quietly. "We need to start our own family. We need privacy." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sandra was pregnant. My son was going to be a father, and I was just finding out like this, from a stranger in a suit who was there to evict me from my own home. "Congratulations," I whispered, "because what else do you say when your world is collapsing around you?" Sandra was standing behind Martin, one hand on her still flat stomach, watching me with cold satisfaction in her eyes. "You have 1 hour to pack your things," the lawyer said. "After that, you'll be considered trespassing." 1 hour. 1 hour to leave the house I had lived in for over 30 years. 1 hour to pack up a lifetime of memories. 1 hour to figure out where I was going to go, what I was going to do. I looked at Martin one more time, searching his face for any sign of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to tell me he loved me more than chocolate ice cream. There was nothing there. "Martin," I said quietly, "I raised you in this house. I sacrificed everything for you. This is my home." "No?" he said, and his voice was as cold as his father's had been all those years ago. "It's our house now. You signed it over, remember? Legally, you have no claim to this property." I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until the little boy I had raised came back. Instead, I went to my room and started packing. 47 years of life fit into 2 suitcases and a small backpack. Photos of the boys when they were young, before they learned to hate me. The dress I wore to Stephen's wedding. A few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother, my medication, a change of clothes. Everything else I left behind. As I dragged my suitcases to the front door, I could hear Sandra in the kitchen, already making plans for redecorating. "We'll need to get rid of that awful wallpaper," she was saying, "and those old curtains. This place needs a complete makeover." Martin was nodding along, agreeing with everything she said. I paused at the front door, looking back at the house where I had raised my children, where I had worked myself to the bone to provide for them, where I had given everything I had and more. "Martin?" I said one last time. He looked at me, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, guilt, maybe, or regret. But then Sandra put her hand on his arm, and whatever I had seen disappeared. "Goodbye, Mom," he said. Not, "I love you," not, "I'm sorry," not, "We'll figure something out." Just goodbye. I walked out of my house and didn't look back. The sidewalk was icy, and my legs weren't as steady as they used to be. I made it about 10 feet before I slipped and fell hard on my knees. The pain shot through my body like lightning, and I lay there for a moment, stunned. I could see the living room window from where I fell. Martin and Sandra were both standing there, watching me. I waited for one of them to come help me up, to ask if I was okay, to show some basic human decency. They just watched. I struggled to my feet, picked up my scattered belongings, and kept walking. Behind me, I heard the front door close with a finality that echoed in my bones. I spent that first night at a shelter downtown. The bed was narrow and hard, and the woman in the next cot cried all night, but I didn't sleep anyway. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had gotten to this point. How does a mother end up homeless because of the children she raised? How does love turn into such coldness? How does a lifetime of sacrifice get erased with a signature on a legal document? I didn't have answers to any of those questions. But I did have something else. Something my sons didn't know about. Something I had been keeping secret for 20 years. And as I lay in that shelter bed, listening to the sounds of other people's broken dreams, I started to smile. Because sometimes, the people who think they've won the game don't realize they're not even playing the same game as you. Sometimes, the mother they threw away like garbage has a few surprises left. My name is Rosa. I'm 74 years old, and my sons just made the biggest mistake of their lives. But they don't know it yet. They will. The morning after they threw me out, I woke up in that shelter bed with something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. Pure, crystal clear clarity about who my sons really were and what I needed to do next. But first, let me tell you about the secret I've been keeping for 20 years. The secret that was literally right under their feet, the entire time they were planning my destruction. It started in 2005, when Martin was 23 and Stephen was 21. I was 54 years old, working 3 jobs and barely keeping my head above water. The house was falling apart, my body was breaking down, and I was terrified of what would happen to me when I got too old to work. That's when I met Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell. She was 82 years old, a widow who lived in one of the mansions I cleaned twice a week. Unlike the other wealthy families I worked for, who treated me like I was invisible, Mrs. Hartwell always made time to talk to me. She would sit in her kitchen while I cleaned, drinking tea and asking me about my life. "Rosa, dear," she said one afternoon while I was scrubbing her floors, "you've been working for me for 3 years, and I've never seen you take a day off. When do you rest?" "I rest when the bills are paid," I told her, which was my way of saying never. She was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "What happens to you when you can't work anymore?" It was a question that kept me awake at night, but I had never said it out loud. "I don't know," I admitted. "Do your sons help you financially?" I almost laughed. Martin was living paycheck to paycheck, spending money on things he didn't need, and Stephen was just starting his adult life. The idea of them helping me was absurd. "They have their own lives," I said diplomatically. Mrs. Hartwell nodded knowingly. "Rosa, can I share something with you? Something that might help?" She told me about her own story. How she had been a secretary for 40 years, making barely enough to survive. How she had started investing small amounts of money in the 1960s, putting away $5 or $10 whenever she could spare it. "I never bought coffee out, never ate at restaurants, never bought anything I didn't absolutely need," she explained. "Every penny I saved went into investments. Conservative ones, mind you. Nothing risky, just steady, reliable growth over decades." By the time she retired, those small investments had grown into millions. "The key," she said, "is to start somewhere, even if it's just a few dollars, and to never ever touch it unless it's life or death." That conversation changed everything. Mrs. Hartwell introduced me to her financial advisor, a kind man named Mr. Thompson who worked with people like me, working-class folks who wanted to secure their futures but didn't have much to start with. "Mrs. Fernandez," he said during our first meeting, "I know this seems impossible, but if you can put away even $20 a month, we can make it grow. The magic isn't in the amount you start with, it's in time and consistency." I started with $15 a month. $15 that I scraped together by walking to work instead of taking the bus, by buying generic groceries instead of name brands, by cutting my own hair instead of going to a salon. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the months passed, I found more ways to save. I would collect aluminum cans on my way home from work. I would sell baked goods to my coworkers. I would babysit for neighbors on weekends. Every extra dollar went into my investment account. The boys never knew. How could they? They never asked about my finances, never showed interest in my struggles or my plans. As far as they were concerned, I was just their poor mother who worked too hard and worried too much about money. But I was more than that. I was a woman with a plan. By 2010, my small monthly investments had grown to over $50,000. By 2015, it was close to $200,000. I couldn't believe it myself. Me, Rosa Fernandez, who had never owned anything valuable in her life, had somehow managed to build real wealth. Mr. Thompson was amazed. "Mrs. Fernandez, you've been one of my most disciplined clients. Most people can't resist touching their investments when they see them grow, but you've never taken out a single dollar." "Because it's not for now," I told him. "It's for when I really need it." I thought that day would come when I got sick or too old to work. I never imagined it would come because my own children would make me homeless. By 2020, my investments had grown to over $1 million, but that's not the whole story. Mrs. Hartwell passed away that year at the age of 97. I had been cleaning her house and keeping her company for 15 years by then. She had become more than an employer, she was the closest thing I had to a friend. At her funeral, her lawyer approached me. "Mrs. Fernandez, Mrs. Hartwell left specific instructions regarding you in her will. Could you please come to my office next week?" I thought maybe she had left me a small keepsake or a few $100s. Mrs. Hartwell was generous, but I was just her housekeeper. I was wrong. "Mrs. Fernandez," the lawyer said when I arrived at his office, "Mrs. Hartwell was very fond of you. She spoke about you often, and she was impressed by your work ethic and your character. She's left you something substantial." He handed me a check for $500,000. I stared at it, unable to believe what I was seeing. "There's more," he continued. "She also left you a letter." The letter was in Mrs. Hartwell's shaky handwriting, and it said, "Dear Rosa, you have been more than an employee to me. You have been a companion, a friend, and an example of grace under pressure. I know you have been investing your money wisely, and I hope this gift will help you achieve the security you deserve. Use it well, and remember that you are worth so much more than the world has told you. With love and respect, Eleanor." I sat in that lawyer's office and cried like a baby, not just because of the money, though that was overwhelming enough, but because someone had seen me, really seen me. Someone had recognized my worth when my own children couldn't. With Mrs. Hartwell's gift added to my investments, I now had close to $2 million, but I still lived the same way, worked the same jobs, and never let on to anyone that I had money. Especially not to Martin and Stephen. I watched them struggle with their finances, make poor decisions, and complain about money constantly, and I never said a word. I told myself I was waiting for the right time, that maybe someday I would surprise them with help when they really needed it. But as the years passed and their treatment of me got worse, I started to realize something. They didn't just take me for granted. They actively resented me for being poor. They were ashamed of me. Martin would make comments about how embarrassing it was that his mother was a cleaning lady. Stephen would avoid introducing me to his friends because I didn't dress well or drive a nice car. They saw my poverty as a reflection of my worth as a person. If they had known I had money, would they have treated me better? Maybe, but it would have been for the wrong reasons. So I kept my secret, and I kept investing. By the time they threw me out of my house in January 2025, my investments had grown to just over $3 million. $3 million that they walked over every single day without knowing it. You see, I had learned something important from Mrs. Hartwell about hiding wealth. She had told me that the best place to keep important things is where no one thinks to look. I keep my most valuable jewelry in a shoebox in my bedroom closet, she had told me once. Burglars look for safes and fancy hiding spots, they don't look in old shoeboxes. So I applied that logic to my money. When my investments reached a certain point, I started converting some of them to physical assets that I could control directly. Gold coins, silver bars, and yes, cash. Lots of cash. And where did I hide it? In the one place my sons would never think to look, under the floorboards in Stephen's old bedroom. It was perfect. Stephen had moved out and never came back except for brief visits. Martin used the room for storage, throwing boxes of junk in there and never really looking at anything carefully. I had spent one weekend in 2018 carefully removing a section of the floorboard, creating a hidden compartment, and sealing it back up so perfectly that you'd never know it was there unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside that compartment was a waterproof container holding $3 million worth of assets. Cash, gold coins, silver bars, and investment certificates. Everything I had worked 20 years to accumulate. They lived above my fortune and never knew it. When they threw me out, when they watched me fall on the ice and didn't help, when they treated me like garbage they were eager to throw away, they had no idea they were standing on top of enough money to change their lives forever. But that money wasn't theirs. It never would be. Because here's what they didn't understand. Money doesn't make you rich. Character makes you rich. And they had shown me exactly what their character was worth. After that first night in the shelter, I knew I couldn't stay there long. It wasn't safe for a woman my age, and I had things to do, plans to make. I rented a small studio apartment across town, paying 6 months in advance with cash I had kept in a safety deposit box for emergencies. It wasn't much, one room, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom that had seen better days, but it was mine, and no one could take it away from me. The landlord, Mr. Garcia, was surprised when I paid in cash. Most people use checks or money transfers these days, he said. I'm old-fashioned, I told him, which was true enough. I furnished the apartment with items from thrift stores and garage sales. A bed, a small table, 2 chairs, a television that was older than some of my grandchildren would have been if I had any. It cost me less than $300 total, and it was everything I needed. For the first time in decades, I felt peaceful. I had no one to cook for except myself, no one to clean up after, no messes to find when I came home from work, no cruel comments about my cooking or my appearance or my worth as a human being. Just silence. Beautiful, blessed silence. I kept working my cleaning jobs, partly because I needed something to do with my time, and partly because I didn't want anyone to get suspicious about how I was supporting myself. As far as anyone knew, I was just a poor old woman getting by on Social Security and part-time work. But in the evenings, I would sit at my small table and plan. I thought about Mrs. Hartwell's letter, about being worth more than the world had told me. I thought about all the years I had sacrificed for children who saw that sacrifice as weakness. I thought about the money sitting under their feet, money they would probably spend on frivolous things if they ever found it. And I thought about what I really wanted to do with the rest of my life. The answer came to me gradually, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. I wanted to help people, real people. People who were struggling the way I had struggled, who were working multiple jobs to make ends meet, who were doing their best in a world that seemed designed to keep them down. I started volunteering at the shelter where I had spent that first terrible night. Not because I needed to be there anymore, but because I wanted to help other women who were going through what I had gone through. I met Maria, a woman my age whose son had stolen her life savings and left her with nothing. I met Jennifer, yes, another Jennifer, who was working 3 jobs to support her disabled daughter and still couldn't afford their medications. I met dozens of women who had given everything to their families and received nothing but heartbreak in return. These women had more dignity in their little fingers than my sons had in their entire bodies. That's when I knew what I had to do with my money. But first, I had to wait. I had to see what my sons would do with their inheritance. I had to watch them destroy themselves with their own greed and stupidity. I didn't have to wait long. 3 months after they threw me out, I got the call. I was volunteering at the shelter, helping serve dinner to homeless families, when my phone rang. The number wasn't in my contacts, but I recognized it anyway. It was Martin. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I answered. "Mom?" His voice was shaky, uncertain. "Mom, is that you?" I almost hung up right then. After 3 months of silence, after throwing me out like garbage, now he wanted to talk? "What do you want, Martin?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Mom, there's been a problem." Of course there had been a problem. There was always a problem when Martin called me. The only difference was that this time, I wasn't going to fix it. "What kind of problem?" I asked. "It's Steven," he said, and I could hear him starting to cry. "He's been arrested." The story came out in pieces, interrupted by Martin's tears and Sandra's voice in the background, telling him what to say. Steven had been running some kind of investment scam at his job. He had been taking money from clients, promising them huge returns, and using it to fund his lifestyle. It had been going on for 2 years before anyone caught on. When the authorities finally investigated, they discovered that Steven had stolen over $800,000 from dozens of victims. Most of them were elderly people who had trusted him with their retirement savings. He was facing federal charges, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, the kind of charges that came with decades in prison. "The lawyer says he needs $500,000 for bail," Martin continued, his voice breaking. "And that's just the beginning. The legal fees are going to be enormous." I listened to all of this with a strange sense of detachment. This was my son he was talking about. The baby I had rocked to sleep, the child I had worked myself to exhaustion to provide for. And now he was a criminal who had stolen from old people. "Mom, are you there?" Martin asked. "I'm here," I said. "We need your help," he said, and the desperation in his voice was almost painful to hear. "I know we haven't been. I know things have been difficult between us. But Steven is family, we have to help him." "How exactly do you expect me to help?" I asked. "You threw me out of my house 3 months ago because I was a burden. What could I possibly do to help Steven now?" "Do you have any savings?" he asked. "Anything put away? Even a few $1,000s would help with the lawyer fees." I almost laughed. Here I was, sitting on $3 million, and my son was begging me for a few thousand, like I was some kind of charity case. "Martin," I said quietly, "you and Sandra made it very clear that I am not part of your family anymore. You chose money over your mother. You chose a house over the woman who raised you. Why would I help you now?" "Because he's your son," Martin shouted. "Because family helps family." "Family?" I repeated. Where was my family when I was sleeping in a shelter? Where was my family when I fell on the ice in front of my own house and no one came to help? Where was my family when I needed them most? Martin was quiet for a long moment. "Mom, please," he whispered finally. "I'm begging you. Stephen could go to prison for 20 years. Please, if you have anything, anything at all." I thought about Stephen sitting in a jail cell, probably for the first time in his life facing real consequences for his actions. I thought about the elderly people he had stolen from, people like Mrs. Hartwell who had worked their whole lives to save for retirement. "No," I said simply. "No?" Martin's voice cracked. "Mom, this is your son we're talking about." "Stephen stopped being my son the day he told me I was nobody," I said. "You both stopped being my sons the day you threw me out of my house. You wanted to be independent, to start your own family without your burden of a mother. Congratulations, you got what you wanted." "Mom, wait." I hung up. The phone rang again immediately, but I turned it off and put it in my purse. Around me, the shelter was full of families eating dinner together, parents helping their children with homework, people who had lost everything but still had each other. Real families, the kind I thought I had raised, but apparently never did. That night, I went home to my small apartment and sat at my kitchen table with a pen and paper. I had decisions to make, and I wanted to make them carefully. I made a list of all the organizations I had been volunteering with: the homeless shelter, the women's shelter, the food bank, the literacy program at the library, the organization that provided scholarships to first-generation college students. Then I made another list of all the ways my money could help real people, people who deserved help, people who would use it to build better lives, not to get out of trouble they had created for themselves. By morning, I had a plan. I called Mr. Thompson, my financial advisor, and made an appointment. "Mrs. Fernandez," he said when I arrived at his office, "I have to say, you look wonderful. Retirement seems to be agreeing with you." I hadn't told him about being thrown out by my sons. As far as he knew, I was just a grandmother enjoying her golden years. "Thank you," I said. "I wanted to talk to you about making some changes to my accounts." "Of course. What did you have in mind?" "I want to liquidate everything," I said. "All of it. And I want to distribute the money to charities." Mr. Thompson blinked in surprise. "Everything? Mrs. Fernandez, that's over $3 million. Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure." "What about your family? Your sons? Surely you want to leave them something?" I thought about Martin's phone call, about Stephen sitting in jail, about the years of being treated like I was worthless. "My sons have made it clear that they don't need anything from me," I said. "I'd rather give my money to people who will appreciate it and use it well." Mr. Thompson looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Fernandez, this is a big decision. Maybe you should discuss it with your family first? Sleep on it for a few days?" "I've been sleeping on it for months," I told him. "I know exactly what I want to do." It took 2 weeks to liquidate all my investments and convert everything to cash and certified checks. 2 weeks during which Martin called me 17 times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. "Mom, please call me back. We really need to talk." "Mom, Stephen's trial date has been set. The lawyer says without bail money, he's going to stay in jail until then. Please, just call me." "Mom, I know you're angry, but this is bigger than our problems. This is about Stephen's life." I listened to every message, but I didn't return any of the calls. On a Tuesday morning in late April, I retrieved the hidden compartment from under the floorboards in Stephen's old room. It wasn't difficult. I still had a key to the house that no one had thought to ask for, and I knew Martin and Sandra's schedules well enough to know when they wouldn't be home. It felt strange being back in that house, walking through rooms where I had raised my children, where I had sacrificed so much for people who ultimately didn't care about me at all. Everything looked different. Sandra had redecorated, just like she'd planned. Gone were the family photos, the small touches that had made it feel like a home. Now it looked like a magazine spread, cold, impersonal, expensive. I retrieved my hidden treasure and left without taking anything else. I didn't want their new furniture or their fancy decorations. I didn't want any reminders of the people my sons had become. That afternoon, I began the most satisfying day of my life. I walked into the homeless shelter with a certified check for $500,000. This is for a new wing. I told the director, a kind woman named Susan, who had been running the shelter for 20 years on donations and prayer. A wing specifically for elderly women who have been abandoned by their families. Susan stared at the check like it might disappear if she blinked. "Mrs. Fernandez, I don't understand. Where did this come from?" "Someone who knows what it's like to need help and not have anywhere to turn," I said. I did the same thing at 4 other organizations that day. $500,000 to build new affordable housing units for seniors. $300,000 to the food bank to expand their services. $200,000 to establish a scholarship fund for children from broken homes who wanted to go to college. And $1 million, the largest single donation, to an organization that helped elderly people who had been financially abused by their own family members. "We'll call it the Rosa Fernandez Foundation for Elder Justice," the director told me, tears in her eyes. By the end of the day, I had given away every penny of my fortune except for $50,000, which I kept for my own expenses. I felt lighter than I had in years. That evening, Martin called again. This time, I answered. "Mom, thank God," he said, relief flooding his voice. "I've been so worried. Why haven't you been returning my calls?" "I've been busy," I said. "Mom, we really need to talk about Steven. The situation is getting worse. If we don't come up with bail money soon." "Martin," I interrupted. "I have something to tell you." "What?" "I had money," I said simply. "Lots of money. More money than you could have imagined." There was silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean you had money?" he asked finally. "I mean I had been saving and investing for 20 years. I had over $3 million. I could hear him breathing, but he didn't say anything. "It was hidden in the house," I continued. "Right under your feet, in Steven's old room. Every day you walked over a fortune and never knew it." "Mom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that you threw away the one person who could have helped you. I'm saying that when you decided I was worthless, you made the biggest mistake of your lives." "Where is the money now?" he asked, and I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. "Gone," I said. "Every penny. I gave it all away. To shelters, to food banks, to organizations that help people who really need it. People who appreciate what they're given." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I thought he might have hung up. "You gave it away?" he whispered finally. "Every penny." But Steven needs help. Your son needs help." "Steven is not my son," I said clearly. "You are not my son. You made that clear when you threw me out of my house. Sons don't abandon their mothers. Sons don't watch their mothers fall and refuse to help. Sons don't treat the woman who raised them like garbage." "Mom, please, we can fix this. We can work things out. Just tell me you're joking about the money." "I'm not joking, Martin. And there's nothing to fix. You got exactly what you wanted, a life without your burden of a mother. I hope it was worth it." "Mom, wait." I hung up and turned off my phone. Outside my small apartment window, I could see children playing in the park across the street. Their mothers sat on benches, watching them with love and pride, the way I used to watch Martin and Steven when they were small. Those mothers had no idea what the future held. They couldn't know if their children would grow up to love them or abandon them, to appreciate their sacrifices or take them for granted. But they were doing what mothers do, loving unconditionally, sacrificing willingly, hoping for the best. I said a silent prayer for them, that their children would turn out better than mine. My name is Rosa. I'm 74 years old, and I am finally free. Free from the weight of ungrateful children. Free from the burden of loving people who don't love me back. Free from the illusion that family is determined by blood rather than by choice. The money is gone, but I'm richer than I've ever been. Rich in dignity, rich in self-respect, rich in the knowledge that I used my fortune to help people who deserve help. My sons will have to figure out their own problems now, just like they wanted. Stephen will face the consequences of his crimes without my help. Martin will have to learn what it means to stand on his own 2 feet. And me? I'll keep volunteering at the shelter, helping other women who have been discarded by the people they loved most. I'll keep living in my small apartment, content with simple pleasures and quiet dignity. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting back at the people who hurt you. Sometimes, the best revenge is living well without them. And that's exactly what I intend to do. The end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below if you've experienced something similar, and subscribe for more real-life stories that matter. Sometimes we all need a reminder that our worth isn't determined by how others treat us, but by how we choose to live our lives.